you all know about Berkeley Lectures. We've been here for, at least in the present name and new incarnation, for about 6 years. I just want to announce our next, tell you about the next meeting that we have is November 20th. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad will discuss Kasravi's Shiism based on a book that was just published recently. And other than that, I just want to tell you about a friend of ours that was beaten up very badly at the demonstration in Oakland, Kayvan Saudari, and he's at the Highland Hospital right now. There are a lot of footage on his arrest and the way he got beat up by the police. It seems to be totally unprovoked, and they thought that they have to remove his spleen. Fortunately, they haven't. They didn't have to do that last night. But today they have found that he has more internal bleeding, and they don't know what it is. He's in intensive care right now. His mother from San Diego has come up, and our friend Saberi, who is in Sweden, he's coming to see him. And most of you know him, so I know you're concerned about him. We will try to get some attorneys to work on his case. Hopefully tomorrow we will start working on it, and hopefully we will get out of the hospital and see what we can do with the police department. I think outside of that,
Amir mentioned he was part of the special forces serving in Afghanistan.
oh yeah, he was,
In Iraq.
unfortunately, yeah. Actually, the two people that became kind of famous in these demonstrations, they were both veterans. The first one was in the hospital with Kayvan too. He just got out the other day. Kayvan was also a veteran. He was both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, so, anyway, we are very happy to have the announcement of this book, and Nilufar from Omid Advocates will introduce the book and can introduce the writers that much better.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nilufar, and I'm on the board of and volunteer attorney with Omid Advocates. On behalf of Omid Advocates, we're really honored
to help people who are in Evin come out. And that's a question that constantly stays with us. And one of the things that became very clear to me was that so many Iranians used the cell phone to document what was taking place in Iran, to document facts, to document history. And the reason they were doing that was because they knew that there would be attempts to wipe that history out. And that the act of remembrance in and of itself is a very important part of anything that we can do. But how do we take it beyond remembrance? How do we take it from where we are constantly made to feel powerless, and we're constantly put in this position that you are dust and dirt, to a position where we can actually do something and take it sort of a few steps beyond that? How do we do that? How do we make that movement? One of the things that's given me a tremendous amount of strength and confidence and hope has been an organization called United for Iran, which is represented by Firuze here. Iranians, at the time of the protests in 2009, Iranians worked very closely and tightly together, because for a while we could see the possibilities that were emerging. Since then, there's been an attempt to sort of block that out, to make it much harder to see that possibility. And so the question for me is, how do we keep and sustain this hope moving forward? I don't necessarily know the answers, but I do feel that one of the sort of the essence of it is that we have to honor and document what has been taking place in Iran. And so one of the organizations that we worked very closely with on this was the Boruman Foundation. They have been documenting what's been going on in Evin prison now they've been doing it, they've gone back to 1979, and they've collected the list of about 16,901 people who've been killed since 1979, which is a sort of tremendous number. And that act of documentation, some of the people whose lives they've documented are, what they've had essentially of them has been no more than an initial scratched into the walls of Evin prison. So, and other prisoners who've gone in after have actually noticed it, witnessed it, and held on to it. So the act of documentation and recording matters. The grassroots activism matters. And hopefully the ways in which we can work together to move things forward will also matter. When you look, for instance, at something on the scale of the Holocaust, where the atrocities that took place were just unbelievable, what has often happened is that people get blurred. And one of the things that has helped, and I think that will help us move forward, is to actually tell the individual stories of the people who are in prison right now. And to find and build on the strengths of our community, not so much on the failings or the weaknesses. One of the campaigns that's taking place right now is the campaign to save Majid Tawakkoli and Bahar Hedayat. And I certainly hope that we can do things on that together. So with that said, I think I'd rather open it and answer your questions rather than lecture. Thank you.
The break, right? Or
No.
if you'd rather sit down and sure. No break, or you don't have break? No break.
Could you please go back to that image you had of Evin as a factory?
Sure.
And just elaborate on that a little bit?
Of course.
He wants the prison, one of the prison, eliminating
Go back.
So when you think of prisons, when you think about how's punishment doled out, the primary way in which punishment is doled out is time. It's quite extraordinary, but you're sentenced to 2 years, 10 years, 15 years. The instrument for measuring and inflicting pain is actually time. And obviously you know the significance of time in Iranian culture. We talk about the end of time and the release from time as something that allows our soul and spirit, it brings about freedom. So part of the idea was time, working the concept of time. Part of the idea is, of course, language, because very early on in the revolution, certain words that were completely outside the vocabulary that I was certainly familiar with, words like muharrib and mufsid al-ard and so forth, were used to define were used as accusations and charges against prisoners. And they very quickly took force. And people started being executed. And so the words, language, started assuming a devastating power. So part of, again, this image was working in language as best we could. And we've sort of used, if you could focus in on it here, you would see that the words and the labels that are used are words and labels that are used often to condemn people. And I think, for me as a human rights activist, one of the goals, one of the things that we as Iranians can do to impact this is to take the power out of these words. It's so important, out of words like muharrib, out of a word like spy, out of these words around which people can destroy people, to take care of them. So all along here you see the words that are used to basically punish people. The images, of course, are, we also speak of the face of time, of watches. And if you think about how time is constructed, again, as a concept, it's often constructed around a story. And oftentimes the story guards the face of a particular tribe or nation or what have you. So the idea that, so for our entire structure, if you think about calendars, that's what they are. They're stories that get etched into the fabric of time. So if you want to change the structure of the calendar, you have to look at the face of the tribe that it represents and so on. So that was another concept that we wanted to work into. The other thing was to show the whole thing together. Because when you read a prison memoir, and so many prison memoirs have been written about Iran, and they're actually very poignant. Unfortunately, many of them are in Farsi, so they're not available to people who are English speaking. And the challenge that we faced, and what I wanted to do, was to sort of try to encapsulate it all very quickly and very simply. And so that was also part of it. And of course, when the protests happened, the fear was, this was the other side of the protests, if you will. It was what doesn't get seen. It's what happens to people when they go out. And so many Iranians dared to step out into the streets of Iran. And when you actually think about what it took for them to step out, it's stunning. Because people stepped out knowing that they can go into this meat grinder. And knowing that their faces are being captured, that their names are being captured, that they're being filmed, and all of this stuff. And yet, 3 million people stepped out together. And so part of it, I think, part of what I find strength and dignity of the Iranian people, part of what motivates me, is when you think about somebody like Majid Tabakkoli and the speech he gave outside Tehran, I think it was Amir University, when you think about what that took to stand there and to speak with that force and that clarity and that conviction, knowing that this is ahead, knowing that he could be lost in this whole jungle, one of many faces, right? It's simply astonishing. So when people speak about the loss of hope with Iran, and you consider the courage of the people who dared to stand up and speak on behalf of, for really the values that in many ways the West is beginning to abandon, those fundamental values. To me, that's where I get a lot of strength. And again, we wanted to show that. Another thing that we wanted to bring out was the crane, the mechanical crane. Because the crane in Iran, which is this monstrosity, has become such a symbol of power. It moves around, it can go anywhere, and people have been dangling on it constantly. And you just think, how did we come to this? How did really the Quran, the Sunnah, the tradition of the Prophet, the Constitution of Iran, how did this crane become the symbol of that? And I think again, as part of a protest, as part of resistance, we have to zoom in on the symbols and figure out where they are, how they operate, and take them on. And so the crane was again a part of that. And then of course the whole mechanism of it, where you enter a prison, you're stripped of your individuality and your personhood. And that's one of the first things that happens in prison. And so how do we give that back? How do we give that personhood, individuality back? Primo Levi, who was this, was the Holocaust survivor. And when you think about it, it's quite astonishing that so many people went into Auschwitz, so few came out. But what did the few who come out, what did they do, and how did they come to terms with it? For me, again, as an Iranian, when I'm asking these questions for myself, because I'm asking, well, how will Iran in the future deal with the legacy of these years? When I was reading that, what you would find is that he speaks of a child named Kurdinek, a 3-year-old kid who was born in prison, died in prison, never left prison, never saw a tree. Never saw a tree. And it's in the capacity to go into detail that that this here's somebody who's been in this horror of Auschwitz. He's come out and he insists on remembering that minor detail of a child who could barely speak, because life had dignity, and witnessing it even after it's gone matters. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is that we ignore and we forget. And in that forgetting, we lose something of who we are. And again, that's not something that I mean, when you think about how many Iranian activists and human rights groups have worked how hard, how many families have worked how hard to guard the names of their loved ones who've been into Evin, to make sure that their story is told. To this day, people go to Khawaram. To this day, the pilgrimages that Iranian people make, going to the cemetery. It's about guarding memory. Because out of memory comes life. It's when memory is gone that life begins to go.
I haven't read the book yet, and I'm curious if the Mehdi, who seems to be the main character of the book, is Mehdi, the main character of the book, an actual person, or is that a composite?
It's a composite, and it's a deliberate composite, because when we wanted to tell the story, our initial impulse was, whose story do we tell? And it's such a hard question. And how do you decide whose story to tell? For one thing. And then, if you do want to tell a real story, how do you get the facts? How do you make sure the facts are correct? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't injure or harm the family? So, it was deliberately wanted to keep it open. But yes, I mean, there were people that went through Mehdi's fate, and that I wanted to work into Mehdi. But not all of them, because I wanted to, because part of the challenge that I have as an Iranian human rights activist is, how do I make people outside Iran who aren't Iranians care, right? And that's a real challenge. So, okay, we had Mehdi wear a One Love t-shirt. We had him be a Zidane soccer fan. A lot of kids in Iran are soccer fans. But so there was a little bit elements of artifice, because if I just made him an average Iranian kid and had, still it would matter. But you had to build it up. You had to. The hope that I have, of course, is that in Mehdi we see Majid Tabakuri, that in Mehdi we see Bahar Ehliyah. We see all the people that Firuze's organization, that Boromad organization is bringing it up. Nicholas Kristof, who writes a lot about, New York Times columnist, who writes a lot about women's issues. He once said something that really helped me, actually. And he said, don't tell the story of, because I was always trying to tell, you're trying to tell these stories, you're working out of trauma. And you want to tell a story of 1,000 people. No, and then there's another person here, and you won't bring that in. You know what I mean? It's a very hard thing to do. And it kind of released me from that by saying, just tell one story. And have that one person tell the larger story.
I think this book really proves that truth can often be told better through fiction.
Can you talk a little bit about your process of working with the artists, and say a little bit about how long this went on? Because I haven't read the book either, but I know that it was serialized online. So I'm curious about the whole process, especially the process that you're talking about of trying to capture something that's beyond an individual story.
One thing I have to say is, for me, so much of there's an aspect of it that's process, and honestly, there's an aspect of it that's accident. I'd always been writing different things on Iran, but it so happened that a friend of mine published something with his publisher for a second, and it so happened that it was just in the time of the before the protests, and I had met Khalil, who's a friend of so many of you here, and he's just a spectacular artist. I mean, phenomenal. I felt calm in his art, in his sculpture, his ceramics, and all of these things. And I knew I wanted to do something. So I went to him and I said, Khalid, let's do something. And he said, what? And I said, how about the secret diaries of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad? I wanted to do something funny, have fun. And we did, we did soccer stadium, the missing Imam soccer stadium. It wasn't gratifying, and it wasn't, and again, it so happened that the protests happened. And then I just knew that this is what I want to do. The publisher said, let's publish it on the web. And that was fantastic because it meant that you were creating the work with your audience with you. It's the difference, if you will, of running a marathon by yourself versus running a marathon when everyone is around you and they're helping you move forward, So as we would make mistakes, somebody would say, oh, you did this wrong. Somebody would say, oh, you've drawn Zahra too much like an Arab woman. Somebody would say, why did you do this to the dogs? And that constant echo really helped hone our work. And then knowing that you're not in a void. I mean, for me, I hate to say this, but the things that have taken place in Iran really bother me. I mean, bother me to the point of isolation. And I just go, it's to the point of insanity sometimes, honestly. And so, just knowing that, my God, there is an audience out there, that there are people that I can connect with, that relate to. And I'm not the only person sitting in his own little corner worried about Iran. That there are people in Finland, for God's sake, who care about what's going on in Iran. There are people in Brazil. This was on the web, And the next thing that happened is that, oh, we want you to do this in French translation. We want you to do this in German translation. And it started mushrooming. And again, for me, and I think the reason I'm saying that to us is, I realize that we Iranians are not alone in our sorrow, we're not alone in our grief, that it's universal. It's what you were saying, Miguel, about the sort of experience of the Argentines, the experience of the Spanish. And people say, oh, we've been through this, and suddenly the story is no longer exclusively about Iran. It's about something larger. So, and then as far as the process, it was email. I would write the scenario, send it to Khalid, he would draw it, send it back to me, I would comment, he would comment on what I had written, I would comment on what he had drawn, and we tried to put things together. We had to produce 3 pages a day. And that's a Herculean thing, especially for some, I would write, it was very, for the writer it's very easy because, Kim, if you just move 1 page. I said, oh, Khalid, please draw me a crowd. And I wanted to be all the millions of people. And then I would write, okay, people in the streets, a torrent that have swept everything in its wake. And then later they called us dust. And they're, well, how much time did that take versus him? And so you'd be pulling his hair out and saying, Amir, slow down or give me more time. And then, of course, the other problem with graphic novels is that you have such little space. And when you want to express too much in such a little space, it's very, very hard. So I would say to him, okay, Khalid, can you do this? And he said, we don't have enough space in this page for this. So it's a lot of fun. My brother jokes with me because I tend to overdo things. And he says, Amir, this was God's revenge on you because you should only write in these little bubbles.
I just would like to say thank you, and I'm Satya, and right now we are just making a film about Iranian government anti-executions. I came here for the primary source for the film, and we already threw 30 minutes of the film. We actually 80 minutes. I just let you know, and cell phone, seeing the cell phone is the primary, whole story revolves around the cell phone footage. A Basir's morality cop killing Samir, and that death was abandoned, never known. But the cell phone was with the girl who was in the prison. She escapes the prison with the dad's help. He paid some money, brought her, tells her to go to Turkey. She goes to Turkey, and she comes here, Berkeley, and now she got the footage, and she trying to bring that up to the news. That's the whole story. But cell phone, and talking to your point, sometimes truth can be told fiction very well. So we are just portraying a little bit larger than life, what's happening in Iran. And so seriously following mostly blogs, like all internet blogs and for the info. I just want to say thank you
Right.
and love.
You know, the world of the blog is actually fascinating, and I think it's as important as the Gutenberg press, in a sense. Really it is, because the Gutenberg press releases in a way frees the Bible up from the control of a very small group. And in the same way the blog frees you up, because the traditional press, you're trapped. Your press has to be in a physical location. You need to have a machine. You need to be able to, type it, and you can get arrested very easily. Whereas once the medium becomes electronic and the surface becomes so much harder to control, there's a certain freedom that comes with that, because you can't freeze language. You can't control the media as easily. So the blog's been huge. This is why we made this person who's telling the story a blogger. Because first of all, because the voice of the youth matters so much, but second of all, because that's where a lot of that's where Iran does have, in a sense, a very vibrant blogosphere. I think it's the third, Sharon, if I'm not mistaken, the third most vibrant or fourth most vibrant blogosphere. So that's huge.
We have a few more questions, but Firuza, could you tell us about tonight's fundraising before I forget, and then we'll have a few more questions.
Okay, so I'm on the board of a cultural center and a school, Farsi immersion school called Gulistan Kids. How many of you have heard of it? So a good number of you. It's an amazing place. It's on 5th Street in Berkeley, and I'm blessed enough to have my kid go there, and I'm on the board. And our friend Yalda actually started it, and we all do what we can. So it's become a community center, and it's an amazing place. And I encourage all of you to look into it and visit it if you like. And so tonight's our first kind of public fundraiser. We've had up with the school, at the school, Shabbat Yalda type events. Tonight we have an event at Yoshi's in San Francisco. And a woman named Monica Jalili, how many of you have heard of her? Yeah? So she has 2 kids, and one of them is somewhat of a newborn, and she's flown from Salt Lake City just to do a free event for us. So it's at Yoshi's in San Francisco, and pretty much after a year I will be going there. And Rija will be coming too, so you'll have more of him. And I have a few extra directions also printed out. So we would love to have you, and it will be a fun night. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Amir, for this nice presentation. I actually have a question and a comment. First of all, you had a very interesting analogy of the lemonade factory that Zahra referred to on that slide. And you said while you were speaking that you were the manager of the production line, and you had to see what were the weaknesses, where things went wrong. In this production line, were you able to identify any
Everything. Thank you for asking that. I was actually so nervous when I started that my whole thing, my was all over the place. One of the arts, if you will, with managing a supply chain is that you want to be able to track every batch of lemonade as it moves through your supply chain, so that you can identify it no matter where it is. And the experience that I had, which was really strange, was that 3 weeks of working into this place, and half of the country I was working in were actually getting sick because of some quality control problem with the lemonade, right? And nobody would confess or say, this is where things went wrong. And you would go into the factory and ask. You ask the manager, oh, we need a $2 million investment for something to protect something. It was layers and layers and layers of lies. Why? Because whichever department confessed would have to absorb the blame for it and pay for it and have it go out of their budget. So I'd go down, so you have to go down to the floor. And I went down to the floor, and one day this very scared worker came up to me and said, this is what happened. They haven't been maintaining the lines. And I had to try to bring that information up to senior management, to the CEO. And at every level, there were attempts to suppress that very basic information, that we haven't been maintaining the lines. And so a similar thing takes place in Iran. When you look at the point at which a person is arrested, right? from that point on, they are supposed to go through a very clean, systematic process in which they know what the charge against them is, a lawyer can represent them, then they go to a court, and so forth. That entire system in Iran is broken. Entire system is broken. And frankly, it was broken from the very beginning. Very early on, Ayatollah Khomeini, when he came to power, writes this very brief letter, very short letter, to Ayatollah Khalkhali, who was the head of the revolutionary courts, and quite a character. And he says, I hereby, and it's a farman, not a fatwa, a farman, which is what the kings would issue. And he says, I hereby appoint you to the head of the revolutionary court. Go ahead and deliver swift justice on the accused. And that really is Iran's constitution. And everything that flowed, all the trouble that flowed, comes from that single document. Basically makeshift courts that undermine the authority of the temporary government and so forth. We are still dealing with the consequences of that, you know. And so when people speak of the Green Movement or for Mousavi or this or that, I'm actually not for anyone. I'm actually for a clean system of justice. And the clean system of justice begins with a clean act of memory, which means that it doesn't matter if it's a mujahid who's killed or a monarchist or who's killed or whoever is killed. There has to be a clean process. But the problem with that is that if you try to do it, at every single point, unfortunately, different groups have become complicit in the elimination of other groups. And so we can't step back from this and start from a point of trust and say, this is what we want and where we want to go. I mean, if tomorrow Khamenei were to fall, would we want the same thing to happen to him that happened to Gaddafi? You see what I'm saying? Or would we want something that reflects the dignity of the Iranian people?
That is precisely what my current concern. You said that that you wanted a constant connection with this, so that the memory of this is kept alive, and it bothers you a lot to the point that it tunes to isolationism. It bothers me a lot too, and I haven't even seen any of this. One of the things I remain concerned about is that a few of these stories, when they come out, they cause gasps, and as you said, people in Finland, Brazil are concerned about it. What worries me is that when too many such memories only are maintained, you get used to it like old leather, and that would be a very unfortunate part of this, where it is a fantastic, like something that's unreal. You just kind of hear about it in some part of the world. So that's why I was asking what are the weaknesses here, because that's the only way to break this down, to make sure that these memories, there is no opportunity for anyone else to build such memories. That was.
And how do you guard that memory? You do it in the fabric of the law in terms of what comes after, right? Because the suffering is already there. The question is, what do we do with that material? And it's a constant. It's a constant, right? I mean, look at America.
So Josh came to you because he went through this. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. As yesterday, with Josh Patel, when he approached you at the Amnesty conference, came to you because he had a close call with this whole thing.
He did, unfortunately. And it's really sad because, again, and I've spoken to Firouzeh Shahram about this. It's that Josh speaks of the echo of the screams in Evin prison. And that echo is ours. I mean, ours as Iranians. When we claim Hafez as our own, all of Hafez, yes, it's me. Rumi, oh yes, that. Well, damn it, then every brick of Evin prison is yours too. And until such time as the Iranian people don't accept that responsibility, generation after generation will have to carry this atrocious weight behind its back. And so we have to draw the line somewhere.
Any other questions? Yes, if not, hopefully you can all make it to the fundraiser at Yoshi's.
Don't forget the book. Don't
Oh,
forget.
the books, yes, please, there are books here. And of course, Andrew will sign them for you.
Thank you all very much for coming.